Welcome back to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. And as I continue my journey through the Bob Dylan records, we get to the end of the first half of his career, or the beginning of the second half, the point after which we start thinking of these albums as sort of classics of the foundations of rock and rolls and sort of additions to the legacy of a great performer. But these are some interesting additions because we are talking about the period today in which Bob Dylan converted to evangelical Christianity and put out 3 albums or 2.5 albums that were really focused on that. Everything with Bob Dylan is mysterious. So while it's generally assumed that he left this Christian period behind, it's not clear if he ever, deconverted, so to speak, whether nowadays he's back to being a mostly secular Jew or whether this continues to be a big part of his identity. But the first of these 3 albums came out in 1979, and it was called Slow Train A-Comin'. This opens with a long bluesy song called You Gotta Serve Somebody. It's a nice track to ease you in because out of the context of seeing this Christian album with the cross on the cover, and it could be a song that anyone who is inspired by the blues and gospel traditions could have aspired to write. All this song seems to be about is that existing in this world, whether you intentionally stand for something or not, in one way or another, you are serving some master. And it made me think perhaps the appeal of Christianity to Dylan was his realization that, he didn't like being the voice of a generation of political progress in the 1960s, but he didn't want to become some empty commercial pop star either. He wanted to stand for something in a way that maybe he hoped was less pressure. This first song also has some great sound on it with electric guitar, electric piano, and backup singing. So it's not over the top like the sound we got on Street Legal, but it's a cleaner, more complete sound than we would hear on jammier albums like Planet Waves. Track number 2 on this album is called Precious Angel. For me, it feels like a rewrite of the song If Not For You. And as you may remember from my New Morning video, I felt it's If Not For You felt like a rewrite of Love Minus Zero, No Limits. So it's as if he rewrites this song every not quite decade. But this one is a love song to the woman who brought him to Christianity. And it's jam-packed full of various ideas surrounding this. So it's both a beautiful song and kind of a messy song. One of the parts that I found kind of weird here was a line that goes, "Howbeit we are so deceived when the truth is in our hearts and we still don't believe." So this is one of the parts of the album that, as a non-religious person, I found really alienating. So I'm aware that a lot of Christians are sort of trained to just talk about Christianity like common sense. And I guess that makes sense, if you're actually raised on this stuff, if you're told that, of course, the universe comes from a God. I mean, I'll admit the Big Bang, it is a hard thing to believe in. It's just as an atheist, I find God even harder to believe in. But what seems so weird about Bob Dylan's religious expression here is how does someone become so Christian overnight they completely forget their previous way of thinking? Because no, Bob Dylan, it is not obvious in my atheist heart. I'm not just denying the existence of God. It's that the existence of God doesn't make sense to me. Don't really know where this is coming from. Track number 3 is a bit sweeter. It's called I Believe in You. So I thought this was the most beautiful song on the album. This one does depict a Bob Dylan who's sort of more aware of his relationships to the secular world. And it's basically him talking about being insecure, about being made fun of for his belief. Track number 4 is the titling track. It is a sizzling, mournful song, but also a bit of a weird one because this is the one where it's most clear that Bob Dylan has not just become a Christian, Jesus is just all right with me, but, someone who we probably called a conservative Christian. There are weird Islamophobic overtones on this one with references to the OPEC crisis and talks about Jefferson rolling in his grave over modern America. Seems like Bob Dylan has been brainwashed into the Jerry Falwell school of thought, where it assumes the founding fathers were devout Christians rather than, especially in the case of Thomas Jefferson, something on the way to being closeted atheist. Tracks 5 and 6 are simpler and cooler for the secular folks. Gonna Change My Way of Thinking and Do Right to Me, Babe are only loosely religious and have nice little grooves in them. However, then we get a song called When You Gonna Wake Up, where the conservatism becomes a bit more present, though doesn't necessarily bother you too much because the song is a nice, cool little Doorsy sound to it, thanks to the electric piano. But yeah, the lyrics do complain about ideologies of fraud and degeneracy. It's hard to know exactly what events Bob Dylan is talking about, whether these are serious issues he's taking issue with or moral panics he's making up. Track number 8 is kind of the silly one on here. It's called Man Gave Names to All the Animals, and it's basically a cute little children's song. I like it. It's kind of charming, but I don't get what's going on religiously here, because I thought if you were writing a religious song, you'd write about how God created all the animals, not how man named all the animals. To me as an outsider, it sounds like the opposite of a religious song. And then finally, track 9 is another intensely religious one. It's called When He Returns, though I kind of liked it because it was very stripped down, and this vision of Jesus coming back felt very emotionally compelling to Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's next Christian album was called Saved. And whereas this is the album where Bob Dylan announces his Christianity with a passion, and he's sort of speaking more to the secular world, both to say, how dare you make fun of me, and also to denounce us as a bunch of degenerates, Saved is, more Christian, but also less aggressive. It kind of is written as if it's within the church, like he's writing, gospel songs for his fellow church members to sing. So it opens with an old standard called Satisfied Mind, which is not necessarily a Christian song, but it's made Christian in this context. But yeah, overall, this album feels like it's less Christian music and more gospel music. It's one that Bob Dylan is partially making because, like many musicians, he was inspired by the working class Black musical tradition of America. And Saved gives us one of the most beautiful songs of Bob Dylan's Christian period, a song called Pressing On. And honestly, I assumed it was just an old gospel standard. I had to look it up, but it turns out it is a Bob Dylan original. Other than Pressing On, I didn't really love any of the songs, but it was pleasant enough to listen to. The third Christian album is called Shot of Love. And as one might assume from the title, this one doesn't seem to be solely focused on Christianity. The title track of Shot of Love seems to be about being alienated from the world. And while there's a Christian element to that, it feels more like a song that would be on his 1978 album, Street Legal, where there was possibly some Christian subtext, but that can't be all that's there. Track number 2, Heart of Mine, is simple poppy country with an interesting kind of understated music at some points and doesn't seem overtly Christian at all. Track number 3 is called Property of Jesus, which is an intense, almost parodic Christian title, but that directness, makes it easy to enjoy. The Christian elements of it are kind of campy, and it's a very intense performance from Bob Dylan. I liked it. Then we get a song about the comedian Lenny Bruce, a sad, melancholy ballad. Now, Lenny Bruce is someone who was convicted for obscenity during one of his routines. So seems like the opposite of a figure that a sort of Christian conservative would sing about. So if there's any indicator that Bob Dylan had changed or he was never really a literal Christian conservative, this Lenny Bruce song tells you that. I guess you could say Slow Train Coming was the conservative Christian album, Saved was the neutral Christian album, and album 3 is about deconstructing Christianity and opening it up. So it's like Bob Dylan is saying, I admire all kinds of martyrs. I admire Jesus Christ, and I admire Lenny Bruce. We get a song called Watered Down Love, which is about faith, but again, in a vague way, and has a nice sound to it that doesn't so much sound watered down, but watered up. It has a kind of nice, rippling, sparkling feel to it. We get a bluesy and vaguely Christian song called The Groom's Still Waiting at the Altar, and we get a vaguely Bob Marley sounding song called Dead Man, which also feels kind of sacrilegious. Dead man, when will you rise? Cobwebs in your mind, dust upon your eyes. It sounds like Jesus Christ coming up from a haunted house. So is this Bob Dylan's sense of humor coming back? I don't know. After that, we get a song called In the Summertime. This one seems to be a bit more sincere in its love for Jesus, but it also sounds like it could be about a person and not a god, though maybe that's just my biased secular mind reading it. We have a song called Trouble that has a nice thumping sound coupled with some good intensity on its bridge. It plays off a kind of catchy simplicity and is again Christian, but only if you know that's its intent. And finally, Shot of Love ends with a beautiful song called Every Grain of Sand, which just seems to say we're all mortal and we're all held to the same standard, even if we're a great celebrity. So overall, if one were to just listen to these records, it would just sound like listening to 3 different Bob Dylan records. I think Slow Train Coming is the strongest, but I was surprised it didn't feel like it was strongest by a mile, because there were certainly memorable songs like Pressing On and Property of Jesus on the later records. And it remains a mystery exactly what Bob Dylan was thinking on these. Certainly, Slow Train felt very frustrating because it seemed like he went from not Christian at all to condescending, right wing, can't even relate to Christian like in a single year. So I guess I'll have to read more about Bob Dylan's life to figure out how his mind managed to work that way, what the heck was going on. Another fun fact with this album is when Bob Dylan was a musical guest on Saturday Night Live, he was in the middle of this period. So he sang, I believe it was the first three tracks on this record, which must have been a funny thing to sing for the SNL audience. But again, one wonders, was Bob Dylan actually in his heart that separated from the secular world if he so casually sort of went on a mainstream show and just sung those things? Or did he imagine he was converting people? I don't know. So let me know your thoughts about these albums in the comments below. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.